Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. Today is day 41. We're in the final chapter of book 1, and we're today learning our final set of case endings for the instrumental case. So, what is the instrumental case? Let's start by talking about how to use it. The name gives you some idea, right? It's used for, first of all, instruments, right? It's telling with what we do something, right? So kind of the key word here for the instrumental is with. Often it will translate nicely into English using with, right? In much the same way that the genitive often translates nicely using of, right? So the instrumental case is used to tell, for example, uh, with what tool or with what instrument, right? Or again, more figuratively, by what means, and, things of this nature, right? With what we're doing something, what we're using to do something. So to take a very simple example, the noun karandash means, as we know, pencil, right? So the instrumental case could answer the question chim. That's the instrumental form of the question word что, chim. So chim means with what. For example, chim pishиш. With what are you writing? Chim pishиш. The answer would be a noun in the instrumental, again mirroring the question, which has chim, right? That что in the instrumental. A possible answer would be karandashom, karandashom. Okay, that's the instrumental of karandash, and we could translate it as with a pencil, right? With what are you writing? What are you writing with? With a pencil. Let's look at a couple of posters here. Занимайтесь грибным и парусным спортом. There, the verb is заниматься. We've looked at that already. There's the reflexive verb, and it means literally occupy yourself or busy yourself with, right? Well, with what should we busy ourselves? With rowing and sailing sports. Now remember, sport is always singular in Russian, right? Sport. So we could say in a looser English translation, do rowing and sailing, right? Do these sports. But in the Russian, we're literally saying occupy yourself, busy yourself, engage yourself with rowing and sailing sport. So again, that's a little bit different. You see that, of course, there are other uses than simply instrument. Right here, we have the um, instrumental case used with this reflexive verb, and we'll talk about that also in detail. But again, even in this usage, it can translate fairly nicely as with, right? Busy yourself with. Okay, another very famous poster. This is a very early propaganda poster from the time of the Russian Civil War, right? When the Reds were battling the Whites, right? The Whites were the kind of monarchist or anti-revolutionary uh, uh, military units that were trying to overwhelm the Bolsheviks, right? And we see this constructivist poster with all these kind of abstract shapes. It's kind of so many of the posters we see are more, I guess you could say, Stalinist in the sense that they're kind of neoclassical. They're kind of very realist for the most part. I mean, we've seen posters from a variety of different periods, but a lot of them are fairly conventional visually. Now, we have seen a lot of constructivist posters from the earlier years that are very striking visually, and here we have really one of the most extremely abstract uh, propaganda posters by an artist called El Lisitsky, very famous artist. If you're interested in that, you may Google him, look him up on Wikipedia. Okay, anyway, the slogan here is "Klinem krasnym bjei bielych." Okay, the bjei bielych part, there's the main verb. It means strike the whites, right? Again, the anti-Bolshevik uh, forces, right? Strike the whites. That, by the way, is an accusative plural, an animate accusative plural, which looks like the plural genitive form. So again, that's something we'll learn in book 2. So anyway, strike the whites. Chim, right? Well, with what should we strike the whites? Well, with a red wedge, right? Krasnym klinem, krasnym klinem. That's the instrumental of krasny klin, which means a red wedge. Okay, and you see if the poster there literally have this giant red wedge striking at the this big white circle. Okay, let's look at a few examples. We already gave these already, really. Чем она пишет? With what is she writing? Answer, она пишет карандашом. Okay, another question. Чем едят суп? Literally, with what do they eat soup? Okay, there's one of those third plural verb forms, right? We could say, what does one eat soup with? What do we eat soup with? Чем едят суп? Soup едят ложкой. One eats soup with a spoon, ложкой. Okay, and we see already a couple of basic instrumental noun endings, for masculines and also neuters, and oi for feminine nouns like ложка. Now, again, we can think of the most basic meaning of the instrumental case in this sense, like writing with the pencil, right? Again, it's expressing instrument, and as so often happens in Russian, where in English we need a preposition, we write with a pencil. In Russian, we don't need the prepositions sa, for example. We put karandash into the instrumental case, and that conveys the fact that we're using it as an instrument. Now, one other very basic use of the instrumental that won't really concern us at this point, but it's important to sort of get on the table now, and we'll actually see that this will help us think of the uses of the instrumental already in this book, but also down the road when we read poetry and whatever. The instrumental often conveys a sense of seeming, right? The way you might imagine simple poetic metaphors or similes, right? Where it's not that something is literally this or that, but rather it appears to be something, or it seems to be something, or maybe, as we'll see down the road, it's transforming into something else, right? We have this idea of becoming, seeming, appearing, right? Things of that nature, as opposed to simply literally being. Okay, so to give a very simple example for now, Поезд летел стрелой. The train was racing, or literally it was flying, determinate, стрелой. That's the instrumental of strela. This is one way to say the train was flying like an arrow. It flew like an arrow. Okay, and that's a little bit high style, right? This sounds like kind of a poetic phrase using the instrumental in this way. In everyday language, you would just use a как phrase, like Поезд летел как стрела. It was flying like an arrow. Okay, so the point here is that obviously the train isn't literally an arrow. We're making this kind of fanciful, poetic comparison, right? And so the best way to put this for future reference is we have a non-identity situation, right? So again, in this book, when I say we have an identity statement, it's basically something like A equals B, right? A is B. Like something like he is a student, right? Now, as we've seen already in those identity statements, we would use the nominative case for the predicate noun, like he, subject is, linking verb, student, right? Now, we're going to use the instrumental whenever we have something less than identity, right? It's not A equals B, but rather A looks like B, A is becoming B, or even things like A will become B, or A used to be B, right? So we even, when we get into the future or past tenses, right, we don't have this very straightforward situation where A equals B, A is identical to B in the present, right? Anything sort of short of that, we start seeing a variety of examples where we're getting the instrumental case. Okay, so file that away for the moment, and we'll talk about that in more detail in future lessons. Okay, now what about prepositions that take the instrumental case, right? As we know, every time we learn a new case, we learn a few basic prepositions that govern that case, right? And the most common one probably is sa, which means with. Okay, I bet you're confused now, right? We just got done saying that all we need to convey with in Russian is the instrumental case ending itself. Well, again, as so often happens, in English we really have two different uses of the preposition with, right? We can use it in this kind of instrumental sense, like I'm writing with a pencil, And we can also say things like, I'm going to the theater with my friend. Okay, those are really two very different meanings if you think about it, right? You're not using your friend as an instrument, right? It really has nothing to do with that other situation, right? You're going there with them. So going with your friend is an example of what we'll call accompaniment, right? You're accompanying your friend. Your friend is accompanying you to the theater. You could also think of this as being alongside your friend, right? You're going alongside your friend, right? Accompanying your friend together with your friend to the theater. Okay, so it's in that second instance, right? Accompaniment, where Russian uses the preposition sa plus the instrumental to tell with whom or whatever we're doing something. As you can imagine, this can be very confusing, right? Students will often write sa when they don't need the preposition at all, right? When they're talking about an instrument, right? So, for example, the correct Russian version of she's writing with a pencil, as we just saw, is simply "Она пишет карандашом," right? All we need there is the instrumental case ending to tell us that we're using the pencil as our instrument. So it's incorrect, or in any case, very weird to say "Она пишет карандашом." That means something like she's riding alongside a pencil, right? Or she's riding accompanied by a pencil, right? So I guess you could say that, but it sounds rather odd, needless to say, right? Why on earth would you say something like that? Okay, so usually in Russian, if we use sa, it's going to be with a person, right? Something we're doing with a person, like он ходил в театр с другом, right? Well, again, you're not using your drug as an instrument or as a vehicle or something. I often joke that if you say, on ходил в театр другом, if you make that mistake, well, first of all, it sounds very bizarre, but to the extent that it makes any kind of sense, it sounds like you're using your friend as a vehicle or something like that, as a means, right? Maybe you're riding your friend like a little pony or something. Okay, so it sounds kind of ludicrous. Okay, so it's drugom, right? Accompaniment. We need the sa when we're describing accompaniment. Now, another example that's quite common is talking about food, right? Where you say things like, I'll take coffee with milk or a pizza with pepperoni or whatever, right? Um, again, maybe this is a bit different from accompaniment, but you can think of, you've got something like coffee and then you're adding milk to it. It's coming with the milk, right? It's kind of being accompanied by milk in that kind of sense. Right there, again, you would use the sa. And if we think about it, we're not using the milk there as a tool or something. So that may help you understand why we do need the preposition sa there in the Russian. Okay, let's look over the full set of the instrumental case endings for the singular, right? Adding now the adjectives for masculine and neuters, which behave the same in the instrumental case, as so often happens, right? Adjectives nouns Okay, meanwhile, feminines oi, nouns as well oi, right? So for feminines, nouns and adjectives are both taking the same ending. That's fairly straightforward. Okay, what are the variants we may see in these basic hard endings? Well, as always, we may see soft endings, right? And we can predict these really, right? The hard version of that will be right? With that soft vowel e, right? Now, keep in mind, we may also add that ending for purposes of the 7-letter spelling rule, right? Where we can't write we have to write e instead. Or for nouns, instead of we have two soft variants, yem, or if the ending happens to be stressed, then you get, as you might well expect, yom, right? I mean, what is the soft version of It's really yom, right? Yom. But if the stress happens not to fall on that ending, then we can't have the yor, right? So we would sort of revert back to yem. Similarly with the feminine, right? Soft version of oi, we get yay for adjectives, and for nouns we would expect yoy. But if that ending is not stressed, then again we can't have the yor. We get yay instead. So that may be a little bit tricky. Let's look at some more examples here of soft nouns. And again, the issue really is the ending stressed or not? right? If it is, we get yo. If it's not, then we can't ever have that, right? So let's look at some instrumental forms. Muzей becomes muzeum. Платье becomes платьем. Тетя becomes с тетей, right? But Slavar, okay, now we're looking at some nouns that happen to be in-stressed, right? So their ending is going to be stressed. And so we get the form with the yo. Slavar becomes slavariom. Корабль becomes кораблем. Белье, laundry, becomes бельем. Семья becomes семьей, right? We're throwing in the sa there with people usually because that's how we normally use the instrumental, right? We're going somewhere with our family, семьей. And with the article статья, that would be статьей, статьей. Okay, so there's a little minor detail there. We look over the complete table and we see all of the special modifiers. Again, most of those are soft in most of their forms, right? Этим, всем, одним, чем, моим, нашим, новым. Okay, there's our ordinary hard adjective. And now some nouns: столом, словарем, музеем, кафетерием. Okay, feminines: этой, всей, одной, чьей, моей, нашей, новой, газетой, неделей, семьей, фамилией. And finally, the neuters look a lot like the masculines. Let's just read the nouns. Окном, морем, right, with no in stress. Бельем, there we have the in stress and we keep the yo. And a special soft example, заданием. Now you may note that the special softs here, as is usually the case, they're not doing anything unusual. But anyway, there are some examples. But remember, special soft nouns are like ordinary soft nouns most of the time, right? We've seen only a few instances where we have to think of them separately, and in those instances, we've surrounded them with the dreaded black box, right, to show that we have to watch out for a certain case form. Okay. By the way, at this point, we've covered in theory all of the endings, so you might want to look at the back of the book, find the complete list of case endings. And again, watch out for where we put those black boxes. Those are these very unusual situations that force us to group the special softs as a separate category. Okay, so let's form a few instrumentals for these adjective noun combinations. And let's just use sa everywhere. Right, so let's, for example, новая рубашка с новой рубашкой. Okay, большой ковер. So let's say we have maybe a room, for example, with a big carpet. So for each of these examples, you could probably think of some concrete instance where you could use it. But again, our main point here is just to get the forms right. Okay, большой ковер, masculine, that'll be с большим ковром, right? С большим ковром. Okay, let's think about большим. That is a 7-letter spelling rule issue, right? So that's why we're writing E instead of I. And then ковер, that's a hard noun, but it's got the mobile yo, and so we get ковром. Number 2, feminine, чистая кухня, с чистой кухней. Okay, there's a soft feminine, but it's not in stressed, so we get yay, not yoy. Number 3, хорошая спальня. So with a good bedroom would be с хорошей, right? There's the 5-letter spelling rule, right, with хороший. So we get хорошей спальней, right? Again, soft noun ending, but unstressed. Number 4, with a huge park, с огромным парком, right? Just a straightforward, hard masculine. С огромным парком. Number 5, новая столовая, with a new cafeteria, would be с новой столовой. Now remember that столовая is itself an adjective, but here, right, it doesn't really matter that much because we're using the same endings for adjectives and nouns in the feminine. Number 6, вкусная еда, with tasty food. С вкусной едой. С вкусной едой. Number 7, красивое дерево, just a regular old neuter noun. С красивым деревом. Number 8, новое платье. There's a soft neuter, not in stressed, so that'll be с новым платьем. Number 9, грязное белье. Another soft neuter, but this one is in stressed. С грязным бельем. Number 10, русская баня. So with the Russian bathhouse, a banya. С русской баней. All right, so soft, but no in stress. Okay, now here are a few examples with of foods with a certain ingredient. So very common if you're ordering food at a restaurant. Kolbasa, let's talk about pizza with sausage. Pizza с колбасой, с колбасой. Coffee with milk, кофе с молоком. Coffee with sugar, кофе с сахаром, с сахаром. Borscht with sour cream. I often put a dollop of sour cream in a lot of Russian soups. Borscht со сметаной, со сметаной. And finally, tea with lemon, chai с лимоном. Chai с лимоном. Okay, let's do a few more. Now talking about people, skim. Okay, so again, with people, we're, at least for now, we're going to be using them, people almost always with this to express accompaniment, right? With whom are we doing something? Okay, с кем ты идешь в театр, right? With whom are you going to the theater? Well, let's say with these people. With an old friend, старый друг, hard masculine, со старым другом. Новая подруга, right? With a new female friend. С новой подругой, right? Ой, ой. Number 3, with my male acquaintance. С моим знакомым. Okay? Once an adjective, always an adjective, right? Знакомым. Number 4, with your wife, with your husband. С женой, с мужем. Okay, муж, right? We get с мужем because of the 5-letter spelling rule, right? We can't have the unstressed o after je. Number 5, with my son, with my daughter. С сыном and с дочкой. С сыном, с дочкой. Remember, if we hear that, we assume that the speaker is referring to their own son or daughter. Similarly, with brother and sister, с братом, с сестрой. Right, with my brother, we assume, and with my sister, or with whoever the speaker happens to be. It's their brother and sister. Number 7, with mom, with dad. С мамой, с папой. Right, those are both taking feminine endings. Another question, с кем ты едешь в Россию? With whom are you going to Russia? With a big group. С большой группой. С большой группой. With the professor. С профессором, right, hard masculine. With another student, с другим студентом. With another female student, с другой студенткой. Number 12, with this person, okay, there's a special modifier. С этим человеком. С этим человеком. Number 13, with the president of США, right, с президентом США. С президентом США. 14, with my uncle or my aunt, с дядей, с тетей. Okay, both of those are soft, taking soft feminine endings. Okay, now again, as so often happens, we don't, when we use it may not always mean sort of accompaniment in a very literal sense. It can take on more figurative uses, like to do something with enthusiasm, with a certain feeling, with pleasure, right? So there are a number of situations like that are sort of more abstract. For example, русскую поэзию надо декламировать с энтузиазмом. One should declaim Russian poetry with enthusiasm. That's kind of a long tradition of reading Russian poetry publicly, in a very dramatic or kind of performative manner, right? It's enthusiasm with enthusiasm. And by the way, that's the hallmark of a shock worker, right? Is enthusiasm. As a good communist, you should always show enthusiasm in order to be an enthusiast, right? An enthusiast, right? And that goes for the classroom as well, right? You can be a shock worker of learning, right? Okay, here's another example. Не поедешь с нами? Не поедешь с нами, right? Will you not go with us? Да, с удовольствием, right? Literally with pleasure. Okay, let's look at a few English phrases and try to translate them into Russian and think very carefully. Do we need s in Russian, or do we simply need the instrumental case with no s? Okay, so think carefully. This seems easy, but it may trip you up. Okay, he writes with a sense of humor. Okay, the basic question here really is this whatever it is being used as an instrument, literally? No. Okay, so with a sense of humor, that's kind of, we can think of it as a feeling that's accompanying his writing. Maybe that might be helpful. So we're going to say on pишет с чувством юмора. Now note, why is the юмора not changing? Because it's in the genitive, right? We don't need to change that phrase. We just need to put the чувство into the instrumental and to say with a sense, with a feeling of humor, right? Of humor. Number two, she would always write with a pencil. Okay, that's obviously an instrument. Она всегда писала карандашом. Number three, in the last year, right? Last year, I made a round trip to Russia with father. Now remember, we assume you're not running off to Russia with other people's fathers, right? So we don't really need a мой here. Okay. В прошлом году я ездил в Россию с отцом. С отцом, right? And stressed noun. Or с папой, right? If you want to say with dad, с папой. 4. Will you not be able to wash the dishes? Okay, that sounds like kind of a passive-aggressive type of command, essentially, right? Would you not be able to wash the dishes? Yeah. And so we're being polite. We're answering with pleasure. Не можешь помыть посуду? С удовольствием, right? With pleasure. That may be a rather sarcastic remark, right? Да, с удовольствием, right? With pleasure. Okay, number 5. С кем вы были вчера? Literally, with whom were you yesterday, right? Who were you with yesterday? Okay, with my sister and brother. Now, again, in Russian, we don't need the my, right? We're assuming it's your own sister and brother. С сестрой и братом. С сестрой и братом. Number 6, he killed a fly with a book. Okay, он убил муху. Okay, let's think about this. We're using the book as an instrument, right? Книга will become in the instrumental книгой. Он убил муху книгой. Number 7, I will take a pizza with sausage and cheese. Я возьму пиццу, okay, with колбаса, с колбасой и сыром, right? Pizza с колбасой и сыром. We're talking about ingredients that are, so to speak, accompanying the dish. Number 8, у него есть комната with a large window. Okay, that's kind of a feature of the room, right? It's a room that comes with a large window. I think it's probably pretty obvious that we're going to need с in the Russian. С большим окном. Это комната, у него есть комната с большим окном. 9, чем мы моемся? With what do we wash ourselves, right? What do we use to bathe? Well, мыло, soap. Okay, we need that in the instrumental. Мылом. Мы моемся мылом. Okay, let's look quickly at another useful topic, useful use of the instrumental, right? With holidays, right? Wishing people happy holidays. This is kind of a counterpart to another type of construction we looked at with the genitive, where we take a phrase that's a wish that we're wishing for someone and simply put it into the genitive, right? Like, Приятного аппетита, right? Bon appetit, right? We're taking приятный аппетит, a pleasant appetite, and putting it into the genitive приятного аппетита, like I wish you a pleasant appetite, right? If we look at a quick poster, right? Победа means victory, and here we see this phrase с победой, literally with victory, with victory. So that means, we're congratulating someone with a certain occasion. Right now, in English, we'd say to congratulate someone on a certain occasion. But in Russian, we're getting this sa plus the instrumental. Okay, how can we explain that? Well, let's look now at some examples. And first, let's backtrack and review how these work in the genitive, right? These wishes that are appearing in the genitive. Remember, the reason for that is an underlying verb that takes the genitive, right? So the underlying verb here is желать, пожелать, right? We wish something to a person, for a person, and that something appears in the genitive simply because of this verb. Now, the trick here is that the verb itself is very rarely used, right, in these expressions where we're just simply wishing someone something like удачи, приятного аппетита, счастливого пути, всего доброго, right, all the best, right? So those are some really useful phrases, and again, this verb, which is usually understood, explains why we're getting these phrases in the genitive. Okay, so the verb that explains the sa plus instrumental is поздравлять, поздравить, which means to congratulate someone. You see the kavo, right? We get a direct object. С кем, with something. That's literally the Russian idiom, right? So we just have to sort of get used to that, and we'll see all sorts of phrases. For example, с днем рождения, literally with day of birth. With day of birth. Днем is in the instrumental. Рождение, as you might guess, is in the genitive. And we usually don't say поздравляю тебя. We can say it, but we usually would just drop it. But because it's understood, we still get this phrase с днем рождения. Поздравляю тебя с днем рождения. Okay, so let's take a few kind of public holidays or occasions, and let's just put them into the instrumental following sa, and we'll get some useful phrases. Like, for example, I got ahead of myself a bit there. So let's start with the День Победы, with day of victory, with Victory Day, right? Celebrating the end of World War II in Europe, right? The Soviet victory. С Днем Победы, с Днем Победы. Okay, with day of victory, с Днем Победы. With New Year, right? С Новым годом, с Новым годом, right? With day of birth, с днем рождения, с днем рождения. With Christmas, Рождество, as you may be able to guess, has to do with birth, right? The birth of Christ. Now, by the way, Рождество isn't a huge holiday in Russia. It's simply a religious holiday, right? So that's not when Russians give Christmas presents, as we might sometimes call them, right? They give presents and have the tree and everything for Novy Gods, right? So that's something that everyone celebrates, and that's really the big holiday in Russia. Рождество is just a religious holiday that if you're Orthodox or whatever in Russia, you would mark it maybe in some way, but you wouldn't be partying or something. Okay, so with Christmas would be с Рождеством, с Рождеством. Okay, here are a few other occasions. With your new place, right? Novosелье, we said, often can refer to this party, this sort of housewarming party. The word literally has to do with settling, right? With a new act of settling, right? You're settling into a new home. And so we can also use this here in the sense of, happy new home, right? I congratulate you with your new place. С новосельем, or с победой, right? Congratulations on your win. With any holiday, с праздником, right? Literally with holiday, right? Happy holiday. Or congratulating someone on a purchase, for example, с покупкой, с покупкой. Okay, so I guess in theory you could use almost any occasion here following sa, as long as it makes sense. Okay, let's look at reflexive verbs with the instrumental, and we already saw an example with our first poster today, right? Let's look at a verb like занимать, занять, which means to occupy or to take up, right? Literally. Okay, so we know this already, right? That's a transitive verb, right? In the sense that you can occupy something, right? So you can follow that up with a direct object. Now, if we add the reflexive particle, we get something a little bit different. Заниматься, заняться, we can understand that often as a truly reflexive use of that particle, to occupy oneself, to busy oneself, to engage oneself. And as we discussed, that helps us understand why we get the instrumental there, chim. And we'll see the instrumental popping up with a lot of these reflexive verbs, right? We'll talk more about that in the future. For now, let's look at this example. Вы занимаете мое место. You are occupying my seat. You're taking up my seat. But let's look at an example with the reflexive verb. Она занимается. She occupies herself. Well, with what, right? Чем? Спортом. There's our instrumental. And that's something like the English, she does sports. She's into sports. So as you might guess, this verb заниматься plus an instrumental is a really useful, really common expression, right? For example, it can be used to ask the question, чем занимаешься? Чем занимаешься? It just means it's a very general question, like what do you do with your time, right? What are you into? What do you do? It can mean almost anything. You know, we can ask about almost any interest you might have or any activity you do. Okay, another very simple example. Интересовать means to interest someone, right? Интересовать. And then we have a perfective of inception. Заинтересовать means to begin to interest someone, right? To get someone interested in something, perfective. Okay, if we had the reflexive particle, we get a verb that, you know, whose meaning is quite predictable, to be interested by. Now here it's more passive, right? We understand that reflexive particle here more in a passive sense. It's not really that you are interesting yourself with something, but usually more of a passive thing, like I'm interested by, right? Now there's another good use of translation of an instrumental phrase, especially with passive verbs, by, right? Let's look at two examples. Его интересует история. Literally, history interests him. Right, note how the subject is at the end of that sentence, right? History interests him, transitive. But we use that passively, right, with the reflexive particle. Он интересуется историей. He is interested by history. There's the instrumental appearing in the noun in the instrumental case here used with a passive verb. More on that later. Okay, so this is really two ways of saying the same thing, right? Его интересует история versus он интересуется историей. Now, again, as we mentioned, the perfective here can be thought of as an inceptive, right? Этот вопрос ее заинтересовал, right? This question began to interest her. It sparked her interest, perfective. Or, again, with the reflexive particle, мы заинтересовались русской культурой. We took an interest, we got interested in Russian culture. Now, again, look at the Russian idiom. We began to be interested by Russian culture, I guess would be the most literal way to translate that there. Okay, let's answer a few questions. Again, just practicing instrumental endings. We're answering the question, чем ты занимаешься? Okay, with what do you busy yourself? What do you do? What are you into? The response would be я занимаюсь, and then we need an instrumental case form. So, I do Russian history, or that could be я занимаюсь русской историей and literature, right? И литературой. Number two, I do football, right? So again, this could also be a sport, or again, almost any activity you could think of. Activities, interests. Я занимаюсь футболом и баскетболом. Number three, I do math and linguistics. Я занимаюсь математикой и лингвистикой. Or I'm into running, boxing, and rowing. Я занимаюсь бегом, боксом и греблей. Греблей. Okay, let's practice the interest verb. And again, we'll say the same thing in two different ways, right? We'll say something interests me and I am interested by, right? So first column will get a nominative and second one will get an instrumental. Меня интересует русский язык. Я интересуюсь русским языком, right? Russian language interests me. I'm interested by, literally, Russian language. Меня интересует русская поэзия, right? Russian poetry interests me. Я интересуюсь русской поэзией. Number 3, русское искусство. Меня интересует русское искусство, Russian art. We'll be looking at a lot of Russian art in books 3 and 4, right? Paintings mostly. Okay. Я интересуюсь чем? Русским искусством. I'm interested by Russian art, in Russian art. Number 4, русская архитектура. Меня интересует русская архитектура или я интересуюсь русской архитектурой. Okay, let's practice a few of these, translating a few examples, being very careful with our choice of verb and our choice of case. They're occupying our table. Они занимают, okay, что? What are they occupying? Наш стол. Okay, direct object, accusative. Number 3, it's time to occupy my seat. Okay, I need to take my seat. I need to get in my seat. The curtain, the bells have rung. The curtain is about to rise. Пора занять мое место. Or maybe more simply, пора занять место. I need to get in my seat right now. Number 3, he had always been interested in Russia. Okay, he had always been interested. That's a prolonged activity in the past. Now, in English, we're using the perfect tense. We don't have that in Russian. So we just need a past tense verb. Now, we could say this two ways, right? We could say Россия его всегда интересовала. Or we could say он всегда интересовался чем, right? By what was he always interested? Россией. Он всегда интересовался Россией. 4, you'll take an interest in history in Petersburg. Okay, it sounds like someone is going to get interested in history, right? Inception, future tense, that's going to be perfective. Let's use вы, talking to a group of students. Вы заинтересуетесь чем? Историей в Петербурге. Вы заинтересуетесь историей в Петербурге. Okay, that does it for today. A fairly simple lesson, just learning some new case endings. But again, that's one of the most important things we have to do in our first year of Russian study. Okay, we'll talk more about the instrumental in this chapter and also add some additional grammar that I think is quite useful. And then we'll be done with book 1. And we'll move on to new victories, right? Вперед к новым победам, товарищи. Until then, до свидания.